This video was produced by the Utah Commission on Aging in partnership with Utah Legal Services and Adult Protective Services under a grant awarded by the Office for Victims of Crime, Office of Justice Programs at the U.S. Department of Justice. My name is Rob Entz, Executive Director for the Utah Commission on Aging. The Governor's Commission was created to inform and empower Utahns as they navigate the opportunities and challenges of aging. Financial exploitation is the fastest growing allegation in Utah. Adult Protective Services investigates about 3,000 financial cases per year. Nationally, the Federal Trade Commission fields almost 3 million reported fraud complaints annually, and most crimes go unreported. The creative mind of a criminal is unlimited. What is sobering, however, is that most of these acts are committed by people we know. Family members account for 60% of this criminal activity, and you add to that friends, church, and club members, people you know. This is called affinity fraud. Experienced broadcast journalist Janice Evans takes us through the story of Grant Johnson and his mother-in-law, Velma.
Meet Grant Johnson. He lives with his wife, Mary, in northern Utah. His elder justice story is about his beloved mother-in-law, Velma.
Velma would do anything for anyone, and especially her grandson and her daughter. This t-shirt had this on, and she would do anything if you'd laugh. She'll wear any hat. She'll wear glasses that make you look funny. She loved going up to our cabin and sitting and she loved to watch the birds. Velma was not the type to say a cross word about anyone.
At one time or another over many years, Velma's daughter and grandson lived with her at this home in downtown Ogden, Utah.
Well, Velma was pretty tight-lipped about her finances and stuff, but she made it month to month. My sister-in-law and her son were living with Velma, and they'd move out, and it was just kind of off and on, and we suspect that they had chemical addictions, and that was one of the reasons why they were living with her.
While Velma loved her daughter and grandson, she was no fool. She knew her daughter and grandson could not be trusted, and so she sent her bank statements to the home of her daughter Joanne and her son-in-law Hank.
She was concerned about the other people in her home knowing that she had this money. At Christmas time, he was opening the mail, and he noticed that quite a bit of money was missing from her account, and we were totally unaware that she had any of this money. Of course, the first thing we did was went over and talked to Velma and said, well, where's all this money going? And she explained that she had given some to her grandson, and apparently they found one of these and found out how much money was in her account, and that's when they started to utilize the money for their own purposes. My wife and I had a message on our phone answering machine that was from Mary's sister, and she had stated, if you know of any rich people that could possibly loan us $4,000 because my son needs to go in and have an operation on his throat, and he'll be paralyzed if he doesn't get this operation.
This set up the conspiracy between Velma's daughter and her grandson, who were both living in Velma's home, paying not one nickel for food, utilities, or property taxes.
And of course, then Velma, not wanting her grandson to be paralyzed for life, said, well, listen, I've got $4,000 in the bank. And even the teller at the bank asked her, Velma, are you sure that you want to withdraw this money? Her grandson had looked at her and said, yeah, you want to withdraw this.
That's when Grant and his brother-in-law Hank got help. They contacted the County Office of Adult Protective Services and learned how to use the system to protect their mother-in-law.
They could not prosecute for the fact that she was giving the money freely. She wasn't coerced or held at knife point or anything else. She was giving the money. It was totally under false pretenses, but they said there's nothing legally we can do, but we can show you how to try and get this stopped. With Adult Protective Services, they have resources to where they can look at bank accounts. They actually looked at the DMV and found out that her grandson had purchased a pickup the day after she had withdrawn this money. And he'd used the $4,000 for that, and a couple weeks later, she withdrew, I think it was $3,700.
Why? Why would he do such a thing to his own grandmother who'd been so kind to him?
Well, I can only just assume that it was partly because of drugs and alcohol and some of the addictions that he might have had. I can't figure anything else out because she was just so good to everyone, and especially him.
For years, Velma took the bus to make a little extra money by cleaning homes. She would walk to the bus stop, rain or shine, snow or sleet, twice a week, and she did this well into her 80s. As Grant Johnson puts it, Velma was the only person in her house who had a job.
Velma had some health issues. She was sleeping on her couch because she gave up her room, and she fell off the couch and had broke her pelvis, and she needed to go to a 24-hour nursing care and rehab in order to get her to walk again. Velma was released from the hospital after she had broke her pelvis, and they released her to a nursing care, rehabilitation and nursing. There was a few other family members who were going up there, and they would constantly tell her how awful it was and how bad we were treating her.
What's in it for them?
Well, the motivation for them to try and get her to come back home was so that she could buy groceries again, so she could pay the electric bill, pay the gas bill, because she was getting her Social Security and a small pension from her husband's work, and so it was a financial means to what they were doing. Finally, at the end, before she did pass away, they didn't come and visit hardly at all. When they quit coming, then she was much more happier. She was eating and all, but she got to the age of 93 and lived just a great long life. Velma really enjoyed traveling with us. She hadn't really been anywhere throughout her life. So as far as flying, first time she'd been on an airplane was with us, and boy, you couldn't get her away from the window after that. And she went to the Grand Ole Opry, watched Porter Wagner and little Jimmy Dickens, and she grew up with the Grand Ole Opry and country music and just loved all of it.
Now retired himself, Grant Johnson spends a lot of his time educating folks at assisted living facilities, nursing homes, and on this day speaking to a group at the South Davis County Senior Center.
You know, it's really important that our seniors not only know what to look for, but they have a phone number. I pass out these folders at the presentations I do, and I would go in during their lunch and talk to them and try and explain some of the scams, some of the latest things that are taken to people's money, and try and help them to not keep giving this money away to them. Be involved, and don't be the only one involved. The other thing is talk to people. See something, say something. Our seniors grew up at a time when we trusted everyone. A handshake was as valuable as your signature. That's why they're the most vulnerable by these scammers. Well, I think in my experience, the education is probably the biggest thing that we can do with our senior citizens, is to try and educate them, and not just them, their children also.
Velma's story is just one example of why there's such a deep urgency to protect older Americans who are so vulnerable to these criminals. even and especially in their own families.
Tracy Larson is Vice President at People's Intermountain Bank. She helped create a pilot program underwritten by AARP to train bank tellers how to identify and manage fraud during a banking transaction. Tracy, nice to see you this afternoon.
Thanks. Good to be here.
You told me one time that banks lose about $1 billion a year.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about how that breaks down.
What happens is when a senior becomes exploited, financially exploited, there's a lot of different avenues where they lose money. It isn't just out of their pocketbook. It can turn into a Medicare or Medicaid problem, and banks are involved in that as well.
So a fraudulent transaction cascades in multiple places.
It does.
Tell us a little bit about the training for tellers and what they're supposed to look out for when someone wants to withdraw money in an unusual circumstance.
When a bank is committed to this, they'll offer training not just to the teller line, but they can offer it bank-wide, because that fraud can enter any of the doors. But with a teller, they're in a unique position where they get to know their customers, and they can recognize if a pattern is broken. If a customer comes in and makes a certain amount withdrawal every week and all of a sudden they're coming in and wiring a substantial amount of money, that's out of character for that customer. So what we do is we train tellers what those red flags are, what to watch for, behaviors, patterns in their withdrawals, unfamiliar characters coming into the building with them, family members that are too interested in their accounts. So we train them what those red flags are, and then train them on what their behaviors should be toward that individual, how to ask questions, how to separate the customer from someone that's come in with them if needed. We train them on what to do if they need help, if they're in a situation and they need to reach out to a supervisor, or if they get in a situation, the customer walks out the door and the supervisor doesn't know what to do. Where can they escalate those situations
Right.
to get help?
I would imagine that most individuals who have made their mind up to take money out for a purpose they think is the right purpose, that it's really difficult to convince them otherwise. Could you share an incident with us when somebody refused to take the advice of the bank?
It happens more often than not. People get convinced that what they're doing is okay, and sometimes they don't want to trust a teller, or they're just so convinced that what they're doing is on the up and up. But we recently had a situation, and this has become more and more common, where individuals are trying to get out of a timeshare. And we had a customer that came in that started withdrawing substantial amounts of money and wiring it to an individual in Mexico. And the tellers, every time he came in, the tellers were saying, you know, this doesn't feel right. And we've seen this happen. Maybe you need to take a look at that. Can we kind of walk through this with you? And he absolutely refused. So they reached out to our risk manager, who informed them that they needed to get the manager directly involved. And so this gentleman, after he had wired $40,000, was called into the manager's office. And the manager basically said, listen, we can't be a part of this anymore. So if you can't realize that this is a fraudulent act, it's a con that you've fallen for, that we need to close your account. And the gentleman got a little belligerent and said, well, let's call this individual. I'll prove to you that he's valid. And so they tried to reach him, couldn't reach him. And that's when the light bulb went off. And this was after he'd lost $40,000.
It's hard for people to accept the fact that they've been taken.
It is.
But I hope that we can implore people to let the bankers help them, that they are partners in this venture, and to prevent some of these unfortunate circumstances.
Exactly.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you.
The Utah Commission on Aging encourages all of you at any age to visit our site and be familiar with Adult Protective Services, Adult Legal Services, the Department of Justice, and other informative websites and tools. Remember that 73% of victims are over the age of 60. Verify before you trust. Be vigilant and accountable, and report the crime. Prevention is always better. Thank you for watching.